There is one ASEAN country that has been particularly on the daily front line of coercion within its exclusive economic zone by a much larger neighbour, China, and that is the Philippines. I'm interested if you think there is anything more that ASEAN could do to show solidarity with Manila.
大家好，我是老吴。最近一段时间，我们越来越能清晰地感觉到，在国际舞台上，亚洲国家正在发出自己更独立、更响亮的声音。他们似乎不再满足于总是跟着西方国家的脚步走，也厌倦了被某些大国当作棋子，用来挑拨亚洲内部以及亚洲与中国的关系。今天我们要看的这段内容就很好地体现了这一点。这是马来西亚首相安华在2025年香格里拉对话会上的一段演讲和问答。在演讲中，安华首相不仅强调了东盟的中心地位和地区合作的重要性，也巧妙地表达了对某些大国单边主义和保护主义做法的担忧，可以说是含蓄地批评了美国的一些政策。在问答环节，来自菲律宾和澳大利亚的代表提出的问题都带有非常明显的针对中国的倾向性，试图引导安华首相选边站队。但安华首相的回答可以说是滴水不漏，既坚持了原则，又展现了外交的灵活性。那么安华是如何阐述亚洲的自主立场？他又是如何巧妙回应那些别有用心的提问呢？接下来就让我们一起来听听这位东亚领导人的智慧。
Beyond our borders, ASEAN is widening its strategic aperture. The ASEAN GCC summit deepened ties with the Gulf. This week's launch of the ASEAN GCC China Trilateral Initiative, unprecedented and momentous, reflects our intent to connect ASEAN's energy and talent with the Gulf's capital and China's scale. New tools like the ASEAN Geoeconomics Task Force are helping us navigate external shocks with sharper coordination and foresight. And while such headlines matter, the real strength lies in what happens beneath them, or what happens within us, as in what Tocqueville describes as the habits of the heart. Rituals that help to establish and sustain democratic institutions with a coherent moral ethos. And that gives us habits of cooperation, trade facilitation, cybersecurity frameworks, cross-border data rules, cultural cooperation. They may not be as dramatic, but they are no less vital, for they give Southeast Asia greater impetus to work together. And the more we act together, the harder it becomes to be pulled apart by external gravity. Preserving our autonomy is not about resisting others. It is about strengthening ourselves. This, in essence, is what ASEAN centrality is about. The same spirit shaped the ASEAN leaders' statement on global and economic and trade uncertainty. We warn of the dangers of unilateral actions, retaliatory tariffs, and the growing risk of global fragmentation. We affirm ASEAN's commitment to an open, predictable, and rules-based trading system, not because it is expedient, but because it is essential. Southeast Asia is not new to globalization. We are one of its original crossroads. From the trade routes of Malacca Sultanate, Majapahit empires, kingdoms across Southeast Asia, to the data centers of today, our region has long depended on openness to goods, capital, ideas, and people. This openness has anchored our prosperity, established our politics, and strengthened regional cohesion. What holds true for us holds true elsewhere. Where trade flourishes, stability follows. When it falters, the consequences ripple far beyond any one region. Economic openness is not just about creating prosperity and growth. It is a source of equilibrium, both between nations and within them, to deal with pressing issues that affect the people, such as poverty, social inequities, or even digital divide. Open markets create the kind of mutual exposure between nations that encourages caution, not confrontation. And when this system is disrupted, markets lose their bearings. Investor confidence wavers while financial flows seize up. What began as a commercial rupture becomes a systemic shock. History reminds us that these shifts are rarely gradual. This commitment reflects the realities we face every day as open, export-driven economies, deeply connected to global markets. For countries like ours, fragmented trade raises costs, lower resilience, and depressed investments. Currency volatility and investor flight do not respect borders, and disruptions in energy, food, or critical minerals cascade quickly through societies. We are therefore under no illusion about the security challenges ahead. But in Southeast Asia, we have learned that lasting stability begins with steady fundamentals, clear policies, and a long view. Trade is not a soft power indulgence. It is part of our strategic architecture. And like any critical system, it must be protected not from competition, but from the onslaught of arbitrary imposition of trade restrictions. All this talk about trade does not mean that we are oblivious to the hard security challenges facing our region. Voltaire famously observed that optimism is the madness of insisting that all is well when we are miserable. This is undeniably a sobering moment in history. The number of armed conflicts is now at its highest since the end of the Second World War. From war in Ukraine, to genocide in Gaza, to civil strife in Myanmar, Sudan, and the Sahel. We must not allow selective outrage or strategic fatigue to dull our moral clarity. Indeed, the genocide in Gaza is a test of our collective conscience, the scale of devastation, the open defiance of humanitarian norms, and the paralysis of institutions meant to uphold them demand more than sympathy. They demand consistency and action. The new orthodoxy affects not just how we view diplomacy, but how we structure security. If persuasion is dismissed as weakness, then exclusivity becomes strategy. We do not object to like-minded partners talking among themselves, but coalitions that build walls instead of bridges, stoke arms competition, or undermine the legitimacy of multilateralism should give us pause. A stable region is not one braced for conflict, but one grounded in openness, transparency, and habit-forming cooperation. We understand that nations need a degree of control over their defense industries and critical infrastructure. We recognize that a measure of deterrence helps keep all parties honest. It is with that realism in mind that Malaysia adopts a posture of active non-alignment to preserve our ability to act on our terms. It is a deliberate way to remain outward-facing, connected, and in control of our strategic space. The suggestion that we do not necessarily align fully with one side, then we must have capitulated to the other is untenable. Nowhere is this more evident than in the prevailing discourse on the South China Sea, where the dispute is far too complex. Our objective is not achieved through escalation, nor by provoking others into disproportionate responses. It is best pursued through steady, principled diplomacy, quiet where necessary, but always firm. Malaysia remains deeply concerned about the potential for escalation among the claimants in the South China Sea. We have no interest in seeing tensions spiral into confrontation, least of all in waters so critical to our own security and prosperity. That is why we will continue to engage with all parties calmly, directly, consistently. We will urge restraint, encourage dialogue, and work to preserve the stability on which this region depends. Above all, we remain steadfast in our principled insistence that all parties uphold the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia does not believe in spheres of influence. History has shown that when major powers attempt to divide the world into exclusive zones of control, smaller nations are often left voiceless. Stability does not come from carving up the map, but from creating space for all to participate meaningfully in shaping the order we live in. Our approach is one of active non-alignment. We will engage all who are willing, major powers and middle powers alike, not to set one against the other, but to maximize our own strategic space. Indeed, while we welcome a strong and enduring United States presence in the region towards fostering peace, we also value our vibrant and firm ties with China and our robust partnership across Asia, Europe, and the global South. What Southeast Asia needs is a dynamic equilibrium that enables cooperation without coercion and balance without bloc politics. For Malaysia, this is a deliberate and strategic posture to help preserve an open region, to assert our sovereignty, and to make our own choices. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for that thoughtful, principled, elegant, and strategic presentation, rich in strategic epigrams, if I can put it that way, how habits of the heart could lead to habits of cooperation, the importance of trade in encouraging caution rather than confrontation, your wonderful reflection that trade is not a soft power indulgence, your reaffirmation of the importance in a dynamic environment of active non-alignment, and your call not to permit strategic fatigue to dull our sense of moral purpose, and your combination of geoeconomics and geopolitical reflections will have been wonderfully received by the delegates here. You kindly agreed to take 4 or 5 questions, so what I think I will do, with your permission, is invite 4 or 5 to pose them, and then you can respond to those as they come on. But if
we have agreed that easy ones I will respond, the more complex one, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong will respond.
You always have powers of delegation that you can exercise if you wish. And let me start with one of our young leaders from the Philippines, Robert Joseph Medillo.
Thank you very much for your very insightful, principled, and inspiring remarks, Prime Minister. My question is about the Laconia Shoal. Malaysia has been actively exploring and exploiting oil and gas resources in the area around the shoal, as it is rightfully part of its continental shelf, and it is within its exclusive economic zone. China has, of course, made an open criticism of Malaysia regarding this issue based on its illegal 10-dash line. Your Excellency, what is Malaysia's most recent view or position about this issue? How are you handling this, considering your robust economic relations with China? What are the challenges and or progress made, if any, to date? Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you. And from China, Qizang.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. In your speech, you emphasize the ASEAN centrality. Nowadays, however, the United States is imposing high tariffs upon ASEAN countries, trying to press them to take side. So, as the leader of the rotating chair of ASEAN, what can you do to make sure that ASEAN continues to play a central role in the region? Thank you.
I'll add one more to the Prime Minister's menu as he writes that question down. Susanna Patton from Australia.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned the importance of ASEAN holding its collective strength and unity. There is one ASEAN country that has been particularly on the daily front line of coercion within its exclusive economic zone by a much larger neighbour, China, and that is the Philippines. I'm interested if you think there is anything more that ASEAN could do to show solidarity with Manila.
Now, on the South China Sea, the consensus within ASEAN is UNCLOS, number one. Number two, to define it further, we agreed that there should be a code of conduct. And in 2 years back, I think in the session in Jakarta, Premier Li Qiang made that commitment too. So we have to proceed towards that. So that means there has been this sort of understanding. We're working towards that code of conduct to make sure that the explorations, the interests of countries be protected, and other countries, including China or United States or other countries, also respect that parameters. And right now, of course, there is no real clarity on exact point of reference. Now, this relates to even the issue of tension between Philippines and China, although I think, frankly, it's a bit more exaggerated, because I've seen my friend, President Bongbong Marcos and Li Qiang engaging, during the ASEAN meet in Kuala Lumpur. We hope that continues, because there is no way out except the engagement between countries, and we do support that position. I've mentioned this to President Bongbong Marcos, that the engagement must be more constant and dynamic, so that we should refrain from escalating this sort of tension. It's not easy, but then that has been the consensus within ASEAN, both bilateral and multilateral mechanisms. Now, on the tariff, our consensus, again, the trade ministers met and the finance ministers, we say no retaliatory tariffs. It will not work. It is better to listen and to engage. Bilaterally, countries have gone, but as ASEAN, we say, look, we have to have a consensus so that no decisions or recommendations come at the expense of any other partner. But the best method is still engagement. Nobody is certain what the final outcome will be, so it is better to be engaged. And the initial engagement, even from the engagement, even from the Malaysian MITI minister, they were quite happy, meeting Lightning and the USTR. There were rooms to maneuver and discuss in detail, so we'll proceed at that. But principally, we all in ASEAN agree that we support a rule-based multilateral system and arrangements. So we do not support, endorse any unilateral action against the principle of free trade. But notwithstanding that, the option is to continue to engage. I mean, best bilaterally, but also ASEAN as group. I think I've covered almost all, right?
好，马来西亚首相安华的这段演讲和问答精华，我们就看到这里。安华在讲话中反复强调亚洲国家维护自身战略自主，坚持开放合作，反对集团对抗的决心。他所倡导的积极不结盟和动态平衡，实际上就是向外界宣告，亚洲有自己的盘算，不想被任何外部势力所裹挟，更不愿成为大国博弈的牺牲品。他对某些大国单边主义和贸易保护主义的批评，虽然没有直接点名，但指向性其实是相当明确的。 而在面对菲律宾和澳大利亚代表那些明显针对中国的提问，安华首相也展现了高超的外交技巧。他不回避问题，但始终将回答拉回到多边框架、国际法准则以及通过对话解决争端的轨道上来，没有轻易掉入提问者预设的反华陷阱。可以说，安华的这番表态代表了相当一部分亚洲国家在中美竞争日益激烈的当下，一种务实而清醒的选择。他们希望在谋求自身发展的同时，也能为地区和平与稳定贡献力量，而不是简单的成为某一方的附庸。好，今天的分享就到这里，感谢大家的收看，我们下次再见。